Stone Cold Steve Austin has finally exposed Brock Lesnar, breaking his silence on their decades-long backstage tension. Fans remember Austin refusing to lose to a young Lesnar on free TV, but the real story goes much deeper than booking. Stick around for the shocking truth about Lesnar's attitude and the confrontation that changed everything. It starts with one word: walkout. The year was 2002. WWE had a problem, and the problem's name was Brock Lesnar. Not in the way that you might think. Lesnar wasn't the problem. Lesnar was the solution. He was the freight train WWE had been waiting a decade to board. 300 pounds of pure athletic intimidation. The NCAA Division I wrestling champion out of Minnesota. A guy who could throw a grown man across the ring like he was tossing luggage. Paul Heyman had taken one look at him and immediately understood what they had. The machine was already in motion. The next big thing was rolling down the track. And the only thing standing in his way, or supposed to be standing in his way, was the most popular wrestler alive, Stone Cold Steve Austin. WWE's plan was simple. Lesnar and Austin were booked to clash in a King of the Ring qualifying match on Monday Night Raw. That match was designed to be the coronation moment. The next big thing runs through the living legend on free TV, and the rocket ship is launched. Vince McMahon had given the order. Stone Cold loses. Lesnar ascends. That's the plan. Austin said no. He didn't just reject the match. He walked out, left the building, didn't show. Vince McMahon declared his absence from the show that same night, which is about as public a humiliation as you can get in WWE's corporate theater. The reason Austin gave at the time was straightforward. He believed the match should have taken place at a major pay-per-view show, not on free TV. He felt the story needed more build-up. He felt losing to a rookie with no proper narrative arc behind it would hurt his character and, by extension, hurt the match they could eventually have. People understood where he was coming from, even if they didn't agree with how he went about it. The guy had spent a decade turning Steve Williams into Stone Cold Steve Austin. He'd bled, gone through legitimate neck surgery that nearly left him paralyzed, and fought back to become the biggest drawing card in the industry. You don't just hand that kind of equity away on a random Raw episode. That was Austin's argument, and from a pure business standpoint, it made sense. But here's the thing. Vince McMahon didn't see it that way, and neither did Brock Lesnar. Lesnar, years later, called Austin out publicly. He said the guy he'd most want to fight was the one who chicken shitted out on me and didn't show up. He was talking about Austin directly and without any softening. He followed it up in a second interview, saying Austin felt threatened by how fast Lesnar was rising. That's Brock Lesnar in a nutshell. He didn't pull punches then, and he never has. Austin never publicly detonated on him in return. He kept the peace. He talked about wanting a match, about respecting the possibility. The feud that never happened became the legend that lived in wrestling's What If Hall of Fame. In Lesnar's own memoir, Death Clutch, published in 2012, he wrote that he and Austin could have drawn serious money together, that their characters were natural enemies, and that he wished they'd gotten the chance to fight. It read almost like an olive branch and a flex at the same time. Lesnar always knew how to make things about Lesnar. Even the compliments felt like challenges, and then Austin in his own way answered. Not with fire, with his spot in WWE's history. By the time Lesnar's memoir came out, Austin was already a Hall of Famer. He was already the guy Sports Illustrated ranked third on their all-time greatest wrestlers list. He was the wrestler who pulled a 9.5 television rating in a 12-minute match against The Undertaker, a record that still hasn't been touched by anyone on Monday Night Raw. When Bleacher Report asked Austin if he could beat Lesnar in a hypothetical match, he went full Stone Cold immediately and said he'd walk out the winner. There was zero hesitation. He believed it. Whether he was right or wrong wasn't the point. He meant it. The two were circling each other across time, across interviews and books and TikTok Q&As and podcast episodes, without ever actually getting in a ring together. Fans kept hoping. Reports would surface about WrestleMania pitches, Austin's sporadic WWE appearances. Every time the calendar page flipped to January, the wrestling internet would start humming about whether this was finally the year. Austin even admitted on a WWE TikTok Q&A that if he were going to face any current superstar, the name he'd give was Brock Lesnar. The dream had staying power. It refused to die. What nobody in 2002 could have predicted? What nobody even in 2022 was imagining? Was that the story between Stone Cold and Brock Lesnar? Wouldn't end in a wrestling ring at all? It would end in a federal courthouse, or at least that's where it was headed. Because in January of 2024, a lawsuit landed on Vince McMahon's desk with Lesnar's name woven through it in ways that made the walkout in 2002 look like a footnote. The next big thing, who once accused Austin of being afraid, suddenly had his own fears to contend with. The industry that built Brock Lesnar into a monster, the same industry where Austin had planted his flag decades earlier, was being forced to look at itself in a mirror, and what it saw was uncomfortable. Not for Lesnar alone. For everyone who had turned a blind eye, everyone who had shrugged at the rumors, everyone who had watched WWE's culture of silence operate in plain sight for years. The walkout in 2002 was about protecting a character. What came in 2024 was about something far more serious than any character. So let's go back to the beginning of that story. Because to understand what Stone Cold is in the middle of right now and what Brock Lesnar is staring down, you have to understand the woman whose name is at the center of it all. Janelle Grant. Janelle Grant was hired to work in WWE's legal department in 2019. After a meeting with Vince McMahon, who lived in the same condominium building as her, she was educated, professional, and had no idea what she was walking into. She alleges the relationship became sexual almost immediately, with McMahon making his intentions clear during a meeting less than 2 weeks into her employment. She says she doesn't remember much of that first encounter, that she blacked out. That detail alone tells you the kind of environment she claims she was operating in. From 2019 to 2022, Grant says she was subjected to a pattern of abuse, coercion, and exploitation that went well beyond anything that could be called a personal failing. Her lawsuit doesn't just allege that McMahon assaulted her. It alleges that he used his position as chairman of WWE to traffic her to other men, treating her as a pawn in contract negotiations. That word pawn is in the actual legal filing. And one of the chess pieces McMahon allegedly moved across the board was Brock Lesnar. This is where the story gets specific in a way that legal filings rarely do. Grant alleges that McMahon demanded she create personalized sexual content for Lesnar in July 2021, at a time McMahon was attempting to keep Lesnar under contract with WWE. The contract negotiation was the context. The leverage was Grant. She alleges McMahon flew Lesnar to Connecticut, across state lines, for what he described as a business dinner combined with a sexual encounter with Grant at McMahon's condo. The lawsuit states that Lesnar made a brief visit to Grant's building, but ultimately didn't go through with the planned encounter because he was too intoxicated and was taken back to the plane, so they never actually met in person. But what Grant alleges happened next is arguably more disturbing than if they had. She says McMahon that same night physically and sexually abused her while role-playing as Lesnar. It's the kind of allegation that doesn't come with a frame or a context that makes it more digestible. It's just brutal, and the text messages, always the text messages. Modern legal cases live and die by text messages, and Grant's lawsuit is loaded with them. In late 2021, she alleges she received a text from a number she didn't recognize, saying, "Hi, this is Polish Joe," with a kiss emoji. 1 minute later, McMahon texted her that Brock, Polish Joe, is going to text you in a few mins. That's the alias, Polish Joe. That's how Brock Lesnar allegedly identified himself to Janelle Grant. Grant says she immediately texted McMahon back, asking why Lesnar was reaching out and whether she was supposed to call him Joe. McMahon explained on a call that Lesnar was the one who had requested her number, and he reminded her of the promise he had made, that she would do anything, and to give Lesnar whatever he wanted. The power structure in that single moment is suffocating to read. And a woman who is allegedly being instructed to comply on demand. She didn't comply fully. She says she tried to be evasive, giving the bare minimum while still following McMahon's instructions. But Grant's lawsuit alleges that Lesnar went further, that he asked her to send videos of herself urinating, and that he later sent her an unsolicited photograph of his genitals. And when Grant asked McMahon to pull back, his response wasn't to protect her. His response, according to the filing, was to push harder. McMahon texted her things like "baby" because we're closer than ever before and our hearts beat as one, encouraging her to move forward with Lesnar, framing abuse as intimacy, coercion as connection. This is who the lawsuit is describing, not the performer who walked out in 2002 in a contract dispute, not the guy who beat John Cena and Roman Reigns and everyone else they put in front of him. This is a picture of what was allegedly happening in the dark, behind the business conversations, while the arena lights were still on and the crowd was still chanting. And then Grant filed the lawsuit. In January 2024, the complaint dropped against Vince McMahon and WWE. Initially, Lesnar wasn't named directly. The original complaint referred only to a world-famous athlete and former UFC heavyweight champion, with whom WWE was actively trying to sign to a new contract. Everyone in wrestling immediately knew who that was. Everyone had known for years who the dominant part-timer with the UFC background was, but it wasn't official yet. Then, in an amended complaint filed in court, Grant officially identified Brock Lesnar by name. That was the moment the dam broke. McMahon, through his attorney, called the amendment a publicity stunt and a smear campaign. Lesnar said nothing publicly at all. He went quiet, and WWE, the company that had just been planning to feature him in the 2024 Royal Rumble, quietly shelved every creative plan they had for him. Just like that, the beast was off the board, gone. To understand what the lawsuit really means, not just for Lesnar, but for the entire machine he operated inside, you have to understand how WWE's internal culture was built. And the man who built it was Vince McMahon. McMahon didn't just run WWE, he defined it. He was the product, the owner, the villain, the genius, and the predator, all allegedly wrapped into one man who had spent 40 years, building an empire where loyalty was mandatory and silence was currency. People inside the company knew you didn't cross Vince. Not publicly, not in the press, not in legal filings. The non-disclosure agreement was the standard operating procedure for anyone who got too close to the machinery and got hurt by it. This wasn't a secret culture. Exactly. It was an open secret, a culture where asking questions was discouraged, where staying in your lane was rewarded, and where the biggest stars, the ones making the most money, were largely insulated from accountability by their own commercial value. Lesnar was the ultimate example of that insulation. He was a 7-time WWE champion, an NCAA national champion, a former UFC heavyweight champion. He had more leverage than almost anyone who had ever worked for McMahon, because McMahon needed him more than he needed McMahon. And that leverage, that power dynamic, is exactly what the lawsuit alleges was being weaponized. Grant alleges she was used as a pawn to secure talent deals, not recruited, not consulted, used. She claims that her body and her compliance were treated as negotiating tools in the context of Lesnar's contract renewal with WWE. Think about that for a second. A human being employed in the legal department of a Fortune 500 company, allegedly being offered to a talent to smooth over a contract negotiation. It's not a creative storyline. It's not a wrestling angle. The legal distinction is important here. Lesnar is not listed as a defendant in the lawsuit. He wasn't sued personally. The defendants are McMahon, WWE, and formerly John Laurinaitis, the head of talent relations who was later dropped from the suit after he agreed to cooperate with Grant's legal team and provide evidence. Laurinaitis cooperating is its own seismic event in this story, and we'll get to that. But Lesnar being named in the filing repeatedly, specifically with alleged text messages and cross-state travel attached. is the kind of detail that does damage regardless of where the legal chips fall. Because here's what named in the filing really means. Brock Lesnar is named 44 times in Janelle Grant's lawsuit. 44. That's not a passing reference. That's not a casual mention. That's someone who is central to the specific pattern of conduct being alleged against the primary defendants. Every one of those mentions attaches a specific act, a specific communication, or a specific arrangement to his name. Each one is a data point taken together. They paint a picture that is very hard to look at. If you grew up watching him throw people around arenas and thinking the only dangerous thing about him was his finishing move, the 2026 affidavit Grant filed, a 40-page sworn personal account, added new layers. It detailed her communications with Lesnar, expanded on her claims about the physical and emotional abuse she endured, and documented a suicide attempt in April 2021, right in the middle of the period when the alleged trafficking was taking place. She wrote that she felt used, leveraged, humiliated, shamed, dehumanized, intimidated, and exploited. Those are her words in a sworn legal document, not a social media post, not a podcast, a court filing. The Laurinaitis angle deserves its own spotlight. John Laurinaitis was the head of WWE Talent Relations for years. He was the man who greeted wrestlers when they arrived, who managed contracts, who had his hands in every piece of talent-related business that moved through the company. He was also, allegedly, one of the men Grant was subjected to at McMahon's direction. He was named as a defendant in the original filing alongside McMahon, and then he flipped. He agreed to cooperate with Grant's legal team and was dismissed from the lawsuit. Think about what that means in practical terms. The man with the most knowledge of WWE's internal talent operations, the man who allegedly was present for and participated in some of what Grant is describing, is now providing evidence to her attorneys. He's sitting in rooms with Grant's legal team and telling them things, until the case moves deeper into discovery or goes to trial. But the fact that he agreed to cooperate, rather than fight the allegations, is telling by itself. Let's talk about the NDA, because that's the fault line the entire lawsuit pivots on. In January 2022, Grant signed a non-disclosure agreement with McMahon, a private, out-of-court process that keeps everything sealed from public view. McMahon's legal team has been pushing for the case to go to arbitration ever since. If they succeed, the depositions stay private. The evidence stays private. The full set of facts, as Grant's team put it, never sees a courtroom. Grant's argument is that she didn't properly review the NDA when she signed it, because she was operating under extreme duress. She says the pressure and psychological weight of what she had been subjected to made it impossible for her to give meaningful, informed consent to that document. Her new affidavit was filed specifically to support keeping the case in open court. There's also a separate argument that McMahon voided the NDA himself by failing to make the payments outlined in the agreement. The arbitration fight is, in many ways, the whole ballgame right now. If Grant's attorneys win it, if the judge rules that the case stays in court, then everything enters the discovery phase. Evidence gets exchanged. Witnesses are deposed, and corporate silence get pulled into the light. That includes whatever Laurinaitis told Grant's team. That includes any additional text messages, emails, flight records, hotel receipts, and communications that may exist beyond what's already in the public filings. It includes anything that might shed further light on Lesnar's role in what Grant is alleging. That's why Grant's team, when Lesnar made his surprise WWE return at SummerSlam in the summer of 2025, came out with a statement almost immediately. That's not a casual press release. That's a legal team sending a very deliberate signal. We're not done. And Lesnar being back on TV doesn't change what we know. And then there's what McMahon actually did that night. The night Lesnar didn't show up to meet Grant. The lawsuit describes the July 2021 night when Lesnar was flown to Connecticut, but left before anything happened. He was too intoxicated, the filing says, and was taken back to the plane, and then in the same house where McMahon had hosted that arrangement. McMahon allegedly physically abused Grant while role-playing as Lesnar. That's how the evening ended. That detail is almost incomprehensible in its cruelty, that the absence of one predator left room for another to act in his name. The earlier part of the filing describes McMahon beating her mercilessly in a separate incident earlier that summer to allegedly prepare her for what sex with Lesnar would be like, pinning her down, dragging her across the floor, ripping out her hair, slapping her. The lawsuit includes this level of detail not for effect. To establish trafficking under federal law, you need to show force, fraud, or coercion. And what Grant is describing in these passages is all three. And Stone Cold Steve Austin, who spent years being asked about his dream match with Brock Lesnar on podcasts and Q&As, was out there in a completely different world. While all of this was allegedly unfolding, he was doing his podcast, making occasional WWE appearances, getting ranked as the greatest WWE wrestler of all time by Bleacher Report, building the kind of legacy that exists entirely outside the corporate machinery that Grant was allegedly trapped inside. The contrast is stark. One man built a legacy so bulletproof that no scandal could dent it. The other, whose career was still active, still tied to the machine, still dependent on the relationship with McMahon, was allegedly entangled in something that makes every championship reign look small by comparison. When the lawsuit became public in 2024, Austin had no public comment on it. He kept his distance. He showed up at WrestleMania 41, crashing his ATV into the barricade at Night 2 in Las Vegas in April 2025. And the crowd went absolutely insane, because for that moment, the glass shatters and nothing else exists. That's the power of the Stone Cold character. But outside the arena, the conversation about Lesnar was not about nostalgia or dream matches anymore. It was about something far heavier. So how did WWE handle all of this? Because how an organization responds to a crisis this serious says everything about its culture. McMahon resigned as TKO executive chairman in January 2024, just days after the Grant lawsuit became public. He has denied all of the allegations, every single one. He did it through his attorney, through press statements, and with the kind of dismissive language that powerful men in legal trouble often reach for: smear campaign, publicity stunt, desperate falsehoods. That's the McMahon playbook. Attack the messenger. Discredit the process. Say nothing that can be used in a deposition. Both Nick Khan and Triple H, Paul Levesque, had been board members in 2022. When the first wave of McMahon scandals surfaced, at that time, McMahon had been forced out amid an internal investigation into non-disclosure agreements he'd made with former female employees. But McMahon used his majority voting power to force his way back onto the board. And when he did, both Khan and Levesque reportedly voted to approve it. A shareholder lawsuit later claimed the internal investigation was a sham. The board approved a man back into power who was later accused of sex trafficking. In the summer of 2025, WWE made a call that surprised everyone in the industry. Brock Lesnar was coming back. Lesnar had been off WWE programming since 2023. With every planned return, the 2024 Royal Rumble Elimination Chamber, WrestleMania 40, quietly dropped once Grant's lawsuit became public, and his name was first referenced in it. The belt was red. The liability risk was enormous. Nobody seriously believed there was any world in which Brock Lesnar was going to walk back through those curtains, while a federal sex trafficking lawsuit still had his name in it 44 times. Then his music hit at SummerSlam. The arena in East Rutherford, New Jersey erupted. He came out and confronted John Cena following Cena's loss to Cody Rhodes, attacked him, and hit the F5. Business as usual. The Beast was back, and within 24 hours, the wrestling internet split into two camps. The people who were thrilled to see him, and the people who wanted to know how this was possible. The answer WWE gave, through Dave Meltzer's reporting, was that their legal team had cleared Lesnar to return as a performer. Meltzer speculated at the time that being cleared might mean the lawsuit was heading to arbitration and that Lesnar faced no personal legal jeopardy in the near term. But Grant's legal team fired back almost immediately, and they were direct. Fightful Select reported that any such clearing was not the case, and that Grant's attorneys expected more facts about Lesnar to emerge. Once the case moved into discovery, the lawsuit was still ongoing. It was very much still Lesnar's problem. Grant's team released a public statement responding to the return. It was pointed, calm, and deliberate, the kind of language lawyers choose when they want precision over anger. They said that the return looked like an attempt to sweep misconduct under the rug, and that it would backfire. They said they looked forward to the facts coming out in a court of law, not in a press release, not on social media. In court. That's where they wanted to have this conversation. The reaction inside the wrestling world was divided in a way that said a lot about how the industry processes accountability. Some wrestlers and commentators said little. The code of silence that has always existed in the locker room is hard to break, especially when it involves a man the size and reputation of Brock Lesnar. Others were more willing to say something, though usually in carefully worded terms. Paul Heyman, Lesnar's longtime advocate, stayed conspicuously loyal, and never has. The broader public commentary from within WWE has been muted to the point of near silence. No active roster members publicly addressed it. No legends came out with statements. No one from within the machine pointed a finger at the machine. That silence is its own kind of statement. When the story is big enough and the power dynamics are intense enough, silence becomes the default, not because nobody has an opinion, but because having an opinion out loud comes with a cost. Stone Cold's relationship to that silence is worth examining carefully. Austin has never publicly addressed the Janelle Grant lawsuit as it pertains to Lesnar. He's never named Lesnar in connection with it. He's never done a podcast episode, a press interview, or a social media post specifically calling out what the filing alleges. And that's notable because Austin has never exactly been the type to hold his tongue when he has something to say. This is the man who walked out of WWE in 2002 rather than do something he disagreed with. This is the man who launched a public verbal attack on the creative direction of the company in a live internet show in 2002. He's not shy about having opinions. But the Grant lawsuit is a different kind of thing. It's a federal sex trafficking case with real human suffering at its center. The time for the wrestling industry's version of cutting a promo on someone is not now. And Austin, who has been in and around this industry long enough to understand where every line is, seems to understand that. What Austin's history with Lesnar does provide, though, is context. A frame, a way of reading the gap between how Lesnar presented himself to the public and who the lawsuit alleges him to be in private. Because here's what the wrestling world knew about Brock Lesnar, the character, the public-facing image. He was the guy who could do anything. He was legitimately the most physically gifted athlete in the history of professional wrestling. Full stop. He won an NCAA championship. He became a UFC heavyweight champion. He came back to wrestling and absolutely dominated it on a part-time schedule because nobody else on the roster could credibly threaten him, and the writers knew it. He beat The Undertaker's WrestleMania undefeated streak. He beat John Cena so badly in a single match that the commentary team ran out of words. He beat Roman Reigns. He beat everyone. The character of the Beast Incarnate was built on one simple premise. Brock Lesnar does whatever he wants, whenever he wants, because nobody can stop him. That was the entire selling point. The invincibility, the unaccountability. And if the allegations in Grant's lawsuit are accurate, if the pattern described in those 40 pages and 44 mentions reflects what actually happened, then the character wasn't so far from the man after all, not because violence in wrestling is the same as abuse in real life, but because the sense of untouchability, of existing outside the rules that govern everyone else. And that's the thread that connects everything. The walkout story, the dream match story, the Polish Joe texts, the SummerSlam return, the retirement, all of it runs on the same wire. Brock Lesnar and the people around him operated as though the normal rules didn't apply. By the time Lesnar returned to WWE television at SummerSlam 2025, the lawsuit was still very much alive. Nothing had been resolved. Nothing had been dismissed. Lesnar had denied any wrongdoing, and he maintained that denial without elaboration, without public appearances, addressing the matter without anything that resembled an attempt to face the questions that were being asked about him in court filings. He just came back to work, walked through the curtain, hit the F5, smiled at the camera, and the machine took him back. Because that's what the machine does with its most valuable assets. It absorbs the scandal, it puts the music on, it drowns out the discomfort with 50,000 people chanting and pyrotechnics going off and a world champion getting thrown across the ring. And for a lot of people in that building in that moment, it worked, but not for everyone, and not for the legal process. What's unfolding in the courts doesn't pause for WrestleMania season. It doesn't care about Raw ratings or SummerSlam buy rates. The discovery process, when it gets there, is going to put evidence in front of lawyers that neither side has fully processed yet. And whatever Laurinaitis agreed to provide when he cooperated with Grant's legal team is sitting in that evidence pile waiting. The legal proceedings are ongoing, and according to reporting, the lawsuit has been a background factor in every conversation about Lesnar's WWE status throughout 2025 and into 2026. McMahon, for his part, was out of the picture by the time the return happened. He'd been out since early 2024, but his shadow was enormous. The man who allegedly set all of this in motion, who allegedly used Grant as a contract negotiation tool, who allegedly created the Polish Joe scenario, he was gone from the company he'd built. And the company was trying to move on without looking like it was moving away from accountability. The wrestling world needed a story. After everything that had swirled, and Obafemi was exactly the kind of wrecking ball that the company once built Lesnar himself to be the next big thing circa 2025, was not Brock Lesnar. It was the man they were putting across from him. Night 2 of WrestleMania 42 delivered the match, and Obafemi essentially squashed Lesnar in under 5 minutes. 5 minutes, that number, matters in pro wrestling. A 5-minute squash at WrestleMania is a statement. It's not a competitive match where both men are tested and one edges the other out. It's a demolition. Femi took Lesnar apart, and the crowd, the same crowd that has been conditioned over 2 decades to treat Lesnar as an immovable object, watched it happen in real time with a kind of stunned quiet that is rare for a WrestleMania crowd. What happened after the bell rang, though? That's the part nobody was prepared for. Lesnar removed his boots. He removed his gloves. He left them in the ring. The universal wrestling gesture for "I'm done." He had an emotional moment with Paul Heyman before walking up the ramp to the back, and when Triple H was asked afterward whether that was Lesnar's final match, his answer was careful and telling. He said it certainly seemed that way. He said Lesnar doesn't come back through the curtain for long conversations. He just walks to his bus and disappears. So the question of whether it was actually a retirement became the question. WWE had not issued an official retirement announcement. Backstage reports from outlets like Fightful Select and Wrestling Observer said the moment actually caught WWE officials by surprise, that most people expected any Lesnar retirement to happen at SummerSlam in Minneapolis, his adopted hometown. SummerSlam there was always the preferred narrative ending, given his connection to the University of Minnesota. The WrestleMania moment felt either spontaneous or deliberately early, and the two camps inside WWE couldn't agree on which it was. Dave Meltzer, whose access to WWE sources is unmatched in the reporting landscape, said his belief was that Lesnar had not retired yet, and that a retirement was expected later in 2026. The WrestleMania image, the boots in the ring, the emotional hug with Heyman was a preview, not the finale. At least that was the read from inside the company. Lesnar himself said nothing publicly. Then, exactly 1 month later, he came back on Monday Night Raw and attacked Oba Femi. Femi was in the ring, hosting his weekly open challenge, when Lesnar came from behind and hit him with 4 consecutive F5s, 4 in succession. For someone who had supposedly just retired emotionally at the grandest stage in the industry, Lesnar didn't look like a man processing his final chapter. He looked like he always looks since 2024. Grant's affidavit from 2026, the sworn 40-page document, added new details, new specificity, new emotional weight. She described interactions with Lesnar that went beyond anything previously outlined in the initial complaint. She talked about the psychological impact of being expected to travel to WWE events on Lesnar's schedule, to be available for him. She described the confusion, the fear, and the complete collapse of any sense of agency. And she confirmed, in sworn legal language, that she now understood that I would not only be expected to perform sexually for Brock, but I would also be expected to travel to other states to do so. That's a federal sex trafficking allegation. Clear language. No ambiguity in the legal framing. And what makes it even more damning from a systemic perspective is the claim that this wasn't a secret inside WWE's orbit. Grant alleges that Lesnar knew about her position at the company. He allegedly told her he was already aware she worked for WWE. When they began communicating via text, he allegedly reacted with anger when she mentioned working in talent relations, not with surprise at the arrangement, but with irritation at a specific department. He knew she was a WWE employee. He allegedly knew the nature of why McMahon had set up the communication. That knowledge, if proven, is legally and morally significant. It means this wasn't a case of someone being deceived into thinking. The lawsuit paints a picture of a man who understood the arrangement and engaged with it anyway, who communicated with a woman under duress, sent her unsolicited explicit content, requested explicit content from her, and allegedly participated in cross-state arrangements organized by her employer to facilitate sexual access. That is not a misunderstanding. That is a specific pattern of conduct, and Lesnar has said nothing, not one word publicly about any of it. Neither Lesnar nor his representatives have publicly responded to the specific allegations in the Grant filings. He went back to work. He walked out at SummerSlam. He retired but didn't retire at WrestleMania 42. He attacked Oba Femi on Raw. He's scheduled for Clash in Italy. He remains, as he always has been, a man who operates on his own terms and communicates in the ring rather than in press releases. That silence has its own legal logic. You don't talk when you're in litigation territory, especially when you're named in a federal case, even if not as a formal defendant. Your lawyers tell you to say nothing. Every word is potentially a deposition exhibit, so the silence isn't necessarily admission, but it's also not denial. And in the absence of any response, any accountability, any acknowledgement, what the public is left with is 44 mentions in a federal filing, and a man who went on television and hit somebody with an F5. Stone Cold Steve Austin, across all of this has remained connected to WWE. In the role of ambassador and legend, he appeared at WrestleMania 41 in April 2025, at the same event where so much of the Lesnar conversation was alive in the backstage world. He crashed his ATV, popped beers, sent the crowd home happy. He is, in a real sense, the conscience and the cornerstone of what WWE claims to represent: the blue-collar rebellion, the anti-authority figure who always told the truth even when the truth was inconvenient. The Texas rattlesnake who never bowed to Vince, even when bowing would have made his life easier. There's a version of this story where Austin's most important act in relation to Brock Lesnar was the walkout in 2002. Not because it was right or wrong in its execution, but because it was a moment where Austin looked at a situation that felt wrong and said, "I'm not doing this the way you're asking me to do it." The details of that walkout were about match booking, but the impulse, the refusal to comply with something that felt dishonest, is something that carries forward into a very different context. Let's talk about what's left, because the lawsuits, the allegations, the silence, the WrestleMania moment, the Raw attack, and where it's headed is not a clean resolution. It's a messy, ongoing, uncomfortable reckoning with the machinery of an industry that spent decades building walls between what happened on camera and what allegedly happened behind closed doors. The Grant case is still working its way through the courts as of mid-2026. The arbitration question hasn't been definitively settled. McMahon is out of his role at TKO, but fighting the allegations with everything his legal team has. Laurinaitis is cooperating with Grant's attorneys, and Lesnar is wrestling Obafemi in Italy. That's the actual state of things. Messy, layered, unresolved. The kind of story that doesn't have a WrestleMania moment where the music hits and the good guy wins. What the story does have is a woman who decided to fight. That's the thing that always gets lost in the coverage of cases like this. The attention goes to the famous names, to the lawyers' statements, to the legal technicalities about arbitration and NDAs and discovery timelines. But at the center of it is Janelle Grant, who alleges she survived a suicide attempt in April 2021 while working for one of the biggest entertainment companies in the world, and who filed a federal lawsuit rather than stay quiet. The NDA that McMahon allegedly pressured her into signing was designed to do exactly what NDAs in corporate environments are designed to do: keep things private. Keep them in arbitration, out of the public courts, away from the press and the public and the light. Grant's team has been fighting that mechanism since day one. The 40-page sworn affidavit filed in 2026, the one with the new details about Lesnar, the new details about what she endured, the new details about everything from the suicide attempt to the role-playing incident, was filed specifically in support of keeping this case in an open courtroom. She wants the facts in public. She wants discovery to happen where people can see it. She wants the full set of facts to emerge, in her legal team's own words, in a court of law. What discovery would actually produce what documents, what communications, what testimony, is something nobody outside the legal teams fully knows yet. But Laurinaitis cooperating means there is at least one person who was inside the room, who knows what was real and what was covered, who has agreed to tell the truth to Grant's attorneys. That is a significant card for her side to hold. A comparison is easy to make historically. Lesnar came up by going through established names. He beat people who mattered. The wins meant something because the opponents meant something. And now, whoever beats Lesnar permanently, whoever gets the true, definitive, boots in the ring for good ending of the Brock Lesnar chapter, inherits a piece of that legacy. Femi is 26 years old. He has time on his side. If Lesnar eventually retires for real, and the expectation from most within WWE, according to Meltzer, is that something definitive happens later this year, potentially at SummerSlam in Minneapolis. Then whoever is in that ring with him is part of history. That's how this business works. It absorbs everything, even its own scandals, and turns it into something to sell. Stone Cold Steve Austin's place in this story doesn't require him to be loud about it. His career, the one that began in 1989 and culminated in a Hall of Fame induction in 2009, and a level of cultural reverence that is basically unmatched in the history of the form, is the counterpoint. He is what wrestling can be when the character and the man are in alignment. When the rebellion is real, not manufactured. When the refusal to comply with authority comes from a genuine value system, even if the way it gets expressed is sometimes imperfect. He is still WWE's top merchandise earner, reportedly pulling in around $3.6 million from the WWE shop site, decades after his last match. The Texas Rattlesnake is bigger now as a legacy than he was as an active performer, because the mythology has calcified into something permanent. Kids who weren't born when he wrestled know who Stone Cold is. They know the vest and the bald head and the two middle fingers and the beer cans. The character lived. What the Lesnar situation asks, what any situation like this asks, is whether a character that lives is enough, whether the in-ring greatness, the championship reigns, the legitimacy of the athletic achievement, the federal lawsuit alleges happened in private. And there's no easy answer to that question. History is full of complicated figures who did brilliant things in public and allegedly terrible things in private. The wrestling industry is not unique in grappling with this. Hollywood has grappled with it. Sports has grappled with it. Politics has grappled with it. What makes the Grant case unusual is the specificity. It's not a vague allegation of a pattern of behavior. It's text message screenshots embedded in a federal filing. It's a cross-state flight and a hotel address sent to an employee via text. It's 44 specific mentions of a name in a federal lawsuit that is still working its way through the legal system. The legal proceedings are ongoing, and whatever comes out of them, whether settlement, arbitration, trial, or dismissal, will write the final chapter of what the Brock Lesnar era in WWE actually meant. And Stone Cold Steve Austin, the man Lesnar never got to fight, the man who walked out rather than give him that coronation moment in 2002, the man who spent 20 years being asked on podcasts and TikToks and in interviews whether the dream match would ever happen, is now watching the denouement of the Brock Lesnar story from the outside. Not from a ringside seat, not from the commentary table, from the position he's always occupied best, as the standard against which WWE's biggest names have always been measured. He won 6 WWE championships. He redefined what a babyface could be. He made Vince McMahon the greatest villain in television history by refusing to stay in the villain's shadow. And now, in the winter of his public career, making appearances at WrestleManias, driving ATVs, drinking beers, still selling more merchandise than active roster members, he represents the version of the story that went right. Lesnar's version is still being written. The boots in the ring moment at WrestleMania 42 might end up being a transitional storytelling beat rather than a true finale. The Clash in Italy win means there's more to tell, and the federal lawsuit means the story being told in the arena and the story being told in the courts are running on parallel tracks that haven't converged yet. But here's what we know. Janelle Grant filed a lawsuit in 2024 that described a specific system of abuse and trafficking allegedly operating at the highest levels of WWE. She named Brock Lesnar 44 times in that filing. She described text exchanges that allegedly established a direct line of communication between her and Lesnar under McMahon's direction. She described a cross-state flight. She described physical abuse allegedly preparing her for contact with Lesnar. She described a suicide attempt while all of this was allegedly happening, and she fought against an NDA that was allegedly designed to keep all of it buried. McMahon has denied everything. Lesnar has denied wrongdoing. The case goes on, and the wrestling industry, the one where Stone Cold Steve Austin is still the greatest ever, where WrestleMania still happens every year, and the glass still shatters, and the crowd still loses its mind, is watching. Because whatever happens in a courtroom will eventually come back to everything that happened in the arenas. It always does. The dream match never happened. Stone Cold never got his hands on Brock Lesnar inside a WWE ring. The 2002 walkout left the story unfinished. Every WrestleMania pitch fizzled. Every podcast question about a potential opponent led back to Lesnar's name and then went nowhere. But wrestling fans have always known something. The story doesn't end until it ends. Not the fictional story, not the real one. And the story of Brock Lesnar, the athlete, the character, the man at the center of a federal lawsuit, the retired wrestler who came back 6 weeks after leaving his boots in the ring, is still very much in motion. Whether his real final moment is at SummerSlam in Minneapolis, or at a future Clash, or in a courtroom, or quietly on a farm in Saskatchewan, where he's always retreated when he's wanted to disappear, nobody knows yet. What we know is that Stone Cold Steve Austin has seen all of it. He was there in 2002 when Lesnar was the future. He was in the ring as referee at WrestleMania XX when Lesnar and Goldberg both got stunned. On the same night, both leaving WWE on the same evening, two giants heading for the exit together. He was the most decorated ambassador the company has ever had, while Lesnar's name was being written into a sex trafficking complaint. And through all of it, the walkout, the dream match mythology, the lawsuit, the boots in the ring, the Raw return. Austin has never needed to say a word. His career says it for him.